I graduated from Michigan State in 1970 with a business degree, and I began working soon after that. Back then, there was a lottery for the draft, and that year, my lottery number was 112. By May, they were at 109, so I was pretty sure I knew who my next employer was going to be. But they stopped at 109, and I didn't go in. And then I really wasn't interviewing much because I didn't think I needed to. And I grew up in Ypsilanti. My dad was the manager of a Grinnell piano store, and we lived probably 2 or 3 blocks from Eastern's campus. And Michigan's marching band used to practice within ear of of my house, and it was really hard for me to root for Michigan State for about 2 weeks. Then I adjusted pretty well.
And let me ask you, so coming out of high school, why was MSU the place for you?
I applied to 3 schools. I was accepted at Michigan and Michigan State, but I didn't want to live at home, and I got a small scholarship at Michigan State, and I had gone up there. My uncle was the business manager of athletics at Notre Dame for 40 years, and he could get tickets to any game. And so my first college games were in East Lansing.
So tell me a little bit how your time there impacted you, maybe still does, and sort of set you on your course, in adulthood and your career.
Well, the first semester or two were very difficult. I was very homesick. It was more than just an academic transition. It was an emotional one, and I was the oldest of 7 kids, and I missed my siblings, and I think they missed me a lot. So that was kind of an adjustment. But after the first year, that changed, and I knew a lot more people and had a couple of jobs on campus, and I just became a lot more familiar. And then, as I would go to class, I just absolutely loved the environment, and I just felt like I was in a paradise, even in the winter, because it can be very beautiful then too. So I think the physical surrounding, and when I started, John Hanna was the president, and the second year, I think, no, he was the president until '68, and then Walter Adams was president for like an interim year. Both I had great admiration for, and I thought they were great leaders, and the school seemed to, function pretty well.
So tell me, how do you get into the investment industry then, from which you've been in your whole career?
I sold copying machines door to door for 2 years, which seems like an unlikely beginning, but it was very hard, but I learned a lot, and I learned that I could talk to people. And when I was finished with that, I didn't want to pursue that too much longer. My wife was a buyer at Hudson's, and she said, why don't you just stop working, find the job that you want to find. We make enough money on my salary, which I had been saving all of mine anyway. And so I started talking to banks, and there were several that were interested. Probably the one that was most interested was National Bank of Detroit. And I met a guy named Earl Blinn there and liked him, and we had 3 or 4 interviews, and I was certain they were going to offer me a job. And after the last meeting, he took me to a branch and showed me what I would be doing there. And then I didn't hear from him again for a week, and I thought, boy, that is strange. So I called him, and I said, Earl, I really thought, we had a pretty good dialogue going, and that you were interested. And he said, are you free this afternoon? I said, yeah. He says, why don't you come into my office? And so I went in there, and he said, you were qualified. We, could have hired you, but I saw you look over what you'd be doing, and I knew what your selling background was, and I said, you'd be bored in 2 weeks in this job. And so it wasn't a very good fit for you, and I think if you pursue something that has a little bit more sales in it with the financial background you have, I think that might be a better fit. So I started interviewing with brokerage firms, and that's how it got started.
Tell me how you then start your own company and the significance of the name.
Well, I worked for my first job in the brokerage business was with a company called Walston, a fairly small firm, I think 7th or 8th largest. 6 months later, they merged with DuPont, which was owned by Ross Perot. 6 months after that, they went bankrupt, and Reynolds Securities bought the office. Then Dean Witter bought Reynolds, and then Sears bought Dean Witter. So all of these were in the same office. They just changed the screw holes in the door. And I worked for a great manager. I learned a lot from him. He had me manage the Dearborn office for about 6 years. But one of the conflicts I had was that we were encouraged to sell products that had the highest commission, and I knew weren't necessarily the best thing. And so I just thought, I really think there's a better way to do this. And after a couple of years, I realized that I could start a company, and I had a fellow working for me who knew a lot more about the technology than I did, and that would have been a roadblock if I'd done that on my own. So he helped with that. And, when the name came about, because I didn't want it to be named after me, I wanted to find a name that represented the values and the culture that we were hoping to build. And so white pine was Michigan state tree. It's a fast-growing tree. When there's a storm, there might be a branch or two that gets whacked off, and it even gives it more character after that happens. And but it's also pretty disease resistant, and it withstands an awful lot of turmoil, which you have to do in this business.
Tell me a little bit more about like the actual being a student at MSU kind of prepared you for your career.
To be honest with you, I probably learned a lot more outside the classroom than I did in. I was a mediocre student. I struggled in some areas. I was pretty good in others, but I really didn't probably apply myself like I should have. I loved a lot of the classes. I had a fair amount of econ, and the upper level econ classes I liked a lot. I was in Walter Adams's class.
One more kind of question on your business, just to tap your expertise, and I know you could probably hold a conference on this, but how has the investment world evolved over the years? What are some of the challenges and opportunities you and your clients deal with today, and are they different?
They're quite different. I think there is a lot more mechanical nature to the business today. There's a lot of stuff is just done by programming. There's not as much, I don't think, individual stock selection as there was when I started. Frankly, I probably took a lot more risk when I was younger, just because I didn't know any better. I probably wasn't as diversified as I should have been. However, I did have a pretty contrarian way of looking at things, so I was comfortable buying stuff that nobody else wanted. And when everybody liked it, I really was ready to get out of it. And I had, a fair amount of success with that. But I realized that to handle a much larger clientele and really to do it effectively for the people we already had, I needed to develop some other habits that were healthy. Before I left Morgan Stanley, which was the last brokerage firm I worked for, I wanted my clients to develop a fee structure, so they would just pay for, based on the assets that we handle. It was more expensive for them to do that, but I explained to them that, it would eliminate one of the conflicts that I think exist in this business. And that was a great help, because all the people that did that, when I was ready to leave, they were already used to that mindset, and I cut their fee in half when we did it. So it was pretty easy to get people to transfer at that point. But I think fee-based, much wider diversification, or all things that have changed over the years. We don't trade very often. We probably have a 5 or 10% turnover a year in the portfolio, if that. And so we're really focused on doing things that we would normally do ourselves. And we own the same portfolio our clients owns. We pay the same fee structure. So when we make a decision to do something, it's because we really do think it's the right thing to do, or we wouldn't do it ourselves.
So, Russ, why are you so passionate about giving back to MSU?
I became a Christian about a little over 25 years ago. And when I was prior to that, there was a show on Wall Street Week, called Wall Street Week on Friday nights. Louis Rukeyser was the host, and he would have various guests on there, and one of the guests was John Templeton. John Templeton ran a mutual fund that averaged 14% a year for about 40 years. He's a phenomenally talented investor. And at the end of the show, Louis Rukeyser said, John, I'd like to ask you something I've never asked you before. If you could tell your audience, what is the greatest investment you've ever made, what would you say? He says, well, Louis, that's pretty easy. He said, the greatest investment for me was the day I decided to tithe. And Louis Rukeyser, he didn't know what to say. This was an awkward moment for him, but I kind of understood it, and then I, just started doing that, and then the gift recipients just expanded as I found things that I thought were valuable and worth investing in, but probably most of the giving I do is toward Christ-based causes.
Why MSU, though? You give your time, your talent, and your treasure. Why are you moved to do that so much?
In hindsight, I realized going to Michigan State really fit my personality more than a more famous school, more than Ann Arbor, because it focused on just normal people and people that maybe would never have a chance to go to school, and they personify that by also going back into the community and where can we apply and help people that are living there right now. So there's a project that I've been supporting for probably 6 or 7, 8 years, and it's taken a while to get started, but it's ramping up now, and it's an urban garden on the west side of Detroit, about 4 blocks from where I lived right after I got married. I just thought, well, this would be great, and there was an elementary school there. A lot of soil remediation had to be done, but there's a fellow named Naeem Edwards that is kind of in charge of that project, and I've gotten to know him, and I just feel like that's another staple of Michigan State's culture that it isn't just in the classroom. It's like in a lot of different areas.
Where did this love for horticulture and agriculture come from?
I did a lot of lawn mowing and stuff like that when I was growing up, and I worked at a golf course. I was a caddy, and I absolutely loved the way golf courses looked. So I just had a great appreciation for God's creation, but I didn't know anything about it when I graduated from Michigan State. And after we moved, our last move was to Plymouth in the mid '80s, and I said, I really don't know anything about this stuff, and I really need to start learning. And we had about a little more than a half an acre that was mostly grass. And by the time I moved 4 years ago, most of the grass was gone. But I'd created a lot of work for me because it was hard to maintain all that.
When did you decide to do the Master Gardener program somewhere in there? And imagine that was impactful. People seem to really enjoy that program.
So that was in the late 90s, and it was, I think it was a 10-week class. And we met for 4 hours, once a week until it was over. And then you also give back 40 hours of volunteer time after you're done with the class. defining moment in that class was probably about halfway through. It was February. I love Michigan State basketball games, and there was a game on that night, and I thought, and it was snowing, and I guess I don't really feel like going to this class, and it was on soil. Dean Krofskoff was the teacher, and I thought, oh gosh, this has got to be the most boring thing that I can possibly go to, but I went. When he got there, he's talking in an auditorium style, but he's up on the stage, and there's a blackboard up there, and he said, we're going to be talking about what I believe is the most important element of gardening that you can possibly learn, and it's about soil and how important it is. He says, but you might have some questions about it ahead of time. There were a lot of landscape people and, garden business owners there, and so he started writing down all these things they wanted to talk about, and he probably wrote down 20 things. And then he gets off the stage, and the lecture starts. And in 4 hours, with about 5 minutes to 10 when the class was over, he had checked off the last thing up there, and it was the most fascinating lecture I've ever heard. And it totally changed my perspective. And then I really started learning what to do and became a little more successful at it. Probably the most important thing that happened, is when I actually believed that Jesus was the person that died for me, and it changed my whole perspective on life, and I had a different focus. My wife and I were having an extremely difficult time prior to that, and after that, both of us, started attending this Bible study called Bible Study Fellowship. There's over 500,000 people around the world that take this, and they all study the same thing, same time. And I still do that. It's once a week, and pretty intense but very meaningful experience. And I probably I didn't model that too well when I was in college. There were a lot of habits I had that were pretty unhealthy, but now that's probably the most important thing in my life, and that doesn't show up in too many bios or interviews. So thanks for asking.
How does your desire to give back go hand in hand with helping people raise their own fortunes so maybe they can give back too? Is there something where that goes in hand? If there's not sure there's a question in there, but I'm just wondering how your desire to give back sort of complements the work you do for yourself and others.
Well, I think it's kind of the way God wired me. And when I was growing up, I got a paper out when I was 9, and I had 3 or 4 jobs until I graduated from high school, and I paid for all the college myself. But during that time, I would buy gifts for my siblings, and I think I got a lot more joy out of it than they did. It was just fun to do, and so I sort of got used to that. And as my Christian walk grew, it just became apparent to me that you're really given all this to help others with it. It's not for you. I mean, you can enjoy some of it, and that's great, but if it's all about you, then, boy, you're not going to have a whole lot of impact on anybody.
Russ, one last thing, and it can be about investment banking, but maybe some of your advice for the young Spartans studying at MSU today.
Well, one case study we have at White Pine is the case study of twins that each had $10,000 to invest when they graduated from school, and one of them decided that they would start investing most of that. They made an 8% return on it, and they did it for 10 years, and then they stopped. The other one decided, I'm going to have fun. I've been working hard in school, so I'm not going to invest any of it. I'll start later. So that other twin started 10 years when the other one stopped, and did it for the rest of her life and never caught up with the first one. So my advice is, just start saving as soon as you can. Make it regular. You have to do it where you don't think about it, because otherwise it's not going to happen. And just let compound interest take care of itself. It's staggering how much money will happen if you do that. And you won't even be inconvenienced by it because you'll be used to doing it. Every job experience that a student has is just an experiment. And it may be the right thing for you to do, it may be not. But God will show you at the right time, the best plan. And you might not agree with that for a while, but in hindsight, you always look back and you say, gosh, whoever would have wanted a job selling copiers door to door? But it was the reason I got hired. It was the reason that I became successful and all these other things, because I wasn't afraid to talk to people that other people were afraid to talk to.